Welcome to Books That Matter, People Who Matter, the program dedicated to promoting reading among all segments of the viewing audience. We're thankful to the Most High for blessing us with the opportunity to be with you and for you to be with us. The purpose of this program is to promote reading among all segments of the viewing audience, the old, the young, the not so young. But read to a senior citizen, read to a shut-in, and be sure you pick up a book and read something yourself. Once again, it's Books That Matter, People Who Matter, and our guest today is Brother Elijah Shabazz Bah. And we're talking about the racism in the New York City museums and as it relates to African exhibits and other exhibits that you might look at as being normal, but not so normal when an expert like Elijah explains to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And you spoke to us about an exhibit at the Metropolitan, and you also went and visited the Museum of Natural History.
That is correct.
What do you have to report?
Well, first of all, I would like to say my viewpoint from traveling and to, like, let's say the Musée du Louvre, and they have an excellent Egyptian exhibit. I give them credit because when you go to that exhibit, it's clear that the people there are the same people as the West Africans, the same people that were taken into slavery and brought to America. The features are clear, the skin tone is clear, and they didn't put any work into the discoloration of the people. So when you come over on this side of the water, you go to, let's say, the Metropolitan Museum, you see they put work in, you see the discoloration of the figures.
Let me go back.
Yes.
Your travels.
Yes.
The first museum or the exhibit,
Well,
the
I'm
Egyptian.
just using that as an example because the Egyptian exhibit
in Egypt.
No, at the Musée du Louvre in France.
In
France, and so you see a difference of the way the curators present.
Okay.
The pieces,
Mm-hmm.
the figurines. That in and of itself, Egyptology, whatever, that's a subject in and of itself. But what I want to talk about is how the black African is portrayed. So I would like to start with the exhibit at the Museum of Natural History.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this particular exhibit is about three types of people: the hunter-gatherers, the pastoral people, and the farming people. So you walk through this exhibit, and the majority of the black Africans there, they are naked, no clothing. And when it comes to Africa in particular, and the world, the largest nomadic group on the planet Earth is a group called the Fulani,
Mm-hmm.
which I spoke about extensively, and they comprise of 50% of the nomadic pastoral groups on the whole planet Earth, and they are 99% Muslim. So here you have a whole group of people. If you go among like the extreme north of Cameroon, you'll see the Mbororo people. But when they come out their tent, the women have on beautiful, colorful garbs. The men are dressed. You would think they came out of a mansion. They just look so stylish, and they pride themselves in their beauty and their clothing and their cloth,
Mm-hmm.
and they make these beautiful tents out of cowhide, and and they are said to have introduced textiles and cotton weaving to West Africa, and that is noted in a book plainly called African Textiles. And during the time when they set up a kingdom of Takrur on the west coast of Africa, which was an Islamic kingdom. So here's a people that brought textiles to West Africa, and we'll get into that later. But the point is that to talk about the pastoral people and to show the black African as a naked people, what this does when our children, they go through these exhibits, and this is important for educators, when they go through these exhibits, what they see is that, Africans have no civilization, the clothes they wear that are made of grass and things like that. And I think I only saw 2 costumes that had actual textiles. You get to the end of the exhibit at the Natural History Museum, and you see these lighter skinned Africans. The Berbers have become white. You Google Berbers and you get a bunch of white faces. And so you have this white African and he has clothes on. And what's interesting is that, they don't call these Africans generally, they call them Tunisians, Algerians, by their nationality, or the umbrella term, Maghribis. And right next to that is the literary tradition of North Africa. You have what's called the Alawa, which is the wooden tablet, which the West Africans write on. And you have the ancient books. And noticeably absent is ancient Timbuktu, from this exhibit, and the Black Africans and the scholars, which were the top scholars in the Islamic world. Mm-hmm. So you have this absent from the exhibit, and you see these lighter-skinned Muslim Africans fully clothed. So that right there, when our children see this, it could make them, it could reinforce, I'm glad they brought us over here, because that's where we come from. And it also reinforces and makes it easy for scammers to say, if you buy this sneaker, there was a scam, this shoe company, I forget which brand, that if you buy the sneaker, you get another one free, and we send it to Africa. Like, Africans need shoes, I mean, and Africans really need, development. Mm-hmm. Africans know how to make shoes. But it makes it easy to do that. It makes it easy for these so-called charitable organizations to get rich, claiming they're feeding and clothing Africa, when Africans know how to feed and clothe themselves.
Exactly.
So so that's one side. So you come over to the west side, and you have what's called the Western Sudan exhibit. And what's interesting is that they still use the term Western Sudan, which is the term that was used before colonization. Sudan is the Arabic word which means black. So this is like the Black West. You see, as opposed to, again, the white Africans. And again, you find these disfigured Africans, naked, disfigured. You got this African with these nails inside of him. And
this exhibit is?
In the Metropolitan Museum. It's called the Western Sudan exhibit. And the Western Sudan is largely, that's the black Muslim area. So, so again, you have these beautiful Africans who wear beautiful garbs. They were very rich, and that speaks to the next exhibit, which is upstairs on the second floor. But again, you find this nakedness of black Africans, no clothes, and just basically, spears, that type of thing. And they love to highlight the animist, even though animism is a part of African, the worship of animals, the worship of objects, the amulets and those type of things, and which is, what they call African traditional religion, but we know all religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, they all come out of Africa. You can see on the walls of the ancient pyramids where, they're making their salat just like the Muslims make today, and the dua and so forth and so on. So, but they like to focus on animism only, and they like to focus on what we would call the jungle brother, the one that's in the steaming jungle, that's running around naked and paint the picture that this is what represents the majority of Africa, which is absolutely a misrepresentation of Africa.
Okay, you have this insight, and it's due in great part to your travels.
Yes, traveling definitely opens your eyes. Like when you go and you see other exhibits, and then you come back to America, and it becomes clear. Because I've been through that museum before, and I never really paid attention.
Right.
You just walk right past it. And the museum is my favorite hangout spot. So what I saw at the other museums abroad And then when I come back, it's like, oh, it becomes very, very clear that this is, overt, racism. If you're aware,
If
in
you're
your
aware,
eyes, are
otherwise
aware,
it's.
you'll just walk right through it as if this is normal, especially if you haven't traveled.
What is important to you from the standpoint of museums before you even traveled? You said
Right.
museums is your favorite hangout spot.
Yes. Well, for me as an educator, I've been teaching the Junior FOI Manhood Training Program for like 20 years.
Junior FOI.
Yes, that's in the Nation of Islam, the Junior Fruit of Islam, and the museum is where I go, where I take my students, and we learn at the museum. This is a place where I do a lot of teaching, in terms of history. And I have to bring the things out because they're not obviously there. And so it's very disturbing, that you have to work at presenting the information because it's not readily available for you. The credit is always given to another civilization.
I'm not following.
Well, let me give an example, and this goes to the next part of the upstairs exhibit, which is the Islamic exhibit. Now, the Black African role in Islam, in this particular Islamic exhibit, is like non-existent. You walk through the exhibit, and there are a lot of depictions of people, and they're all pale skin. So you get this impression that, all great feats in Islam, all great knowledge and, scholarship comes from white Muslims. Again, as I said earlier, the top scholars in Islam were in Timbuktu, were in Mali. You had a teaching system where from a child, you first learn the Quran and you memorize it.
Mm-hmm.
In order to become a scholar, you must memorize the Quran. And then from there, you go into the Quran and you get into the sciences. If the Quran talks about animals, the Quran talks about astronomy. Even to this day, you have Muslims, Fulani herdsmen that could name all the galaxies in their Arabic names by heart. And this is the type of learning you got in Timbuktu and in the universities at Futa Jalin.
So the galaxies, in terms of reading the Quran, would be the seven heavens?
Yes. Yes, the study of the stars and so forth. Matter of fact, most of the stars, 2/3 of the stars have Arabic names because the Muslims are the great explorers of the heavens. And you had this knowledge among Black Africans in Timbuktu, totally absent from the exhibit.
Absent
from the Islamic exhibit.
How long I would ask, how long has this exhibit been up? But it's not that it's been up, it's the planning of it is longer than it's...
Right, it's a standing exhibit, and it's been planned by a woman from India, I forget her name. And what's interesting is that she has a whole room dedicated to Hinduism because she comes from India. And so, this culture is like, these cultures interact with each other. So she has a room for India, no room for the Black African. And you see all these beautiful treasures, this beautiful gold. And
which room?
In the Islamic exhibit. And ivory, all of this comes out of Africa. And again, you have the North African script, which is called the Maghribi script. You have that on display. But all of this is, again, attributed to, the Maghribis, the Tunisians, the Algerians, the Moroccans. But is none, no credit is given to the Black African. Even the Almoravid Empire, which is the empire that started in southern Mauritania, Senegal, a movement, the Al-Murabitun, which means the people of the fort. And what's interesting is that today you have a football team named Al-Murabitun out of Mauritania, and these are the descendants of the Almoravids. So they named their team after that, which is good. They know their history. But these are the ones that went up and established the country that we know as Morocco today, which is called Marrakesh. And that was started by the Fulani and the Berbers of southern Mauritania and Senegal. And they downplay the Almoravid influence. The Almoravids actually saved Islamic Spain.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's like, I'm using an analogy, it's like coming to, or a portrayal of New York, and Harlem is nowhere in the portrayal.
Right, right.
And let's say that portrayal is in some place in Europe, and so the people see, oh, this is New York.
Right.
But someone who knows New York
Yes.
would say, wait a minute, you know, Harlem is a central.
Yes.
Harlem is the Big Apple.
Yes. And black culture is American culture.
Anyway.
When you go overseas, all the music, everything else, like when you watch French television, you
like
listen
you
to
closed
French
your eyes
radio.
and woke up and you
Right.
didn't leave the States.
Yeah, exactly. When you go there, R&B music, hip hop music, you know, everything else is in French, but the music is black music. You see, in classic, you know, old school black music. So this American music is black music. Black music is American music, and our terminologies and the way we talk and everything. So that little place called Harlem is essential to America. You see, but yes, if you write that part out, you know, and attribute all of this to, you know, another people, this is what's happening at these museums. You see all of this wiped out, you know, Black Africa.
So that, another analogy, is that you see an exhibit on hip hop,
Right.
you see Wu-Tang, the name, you see this,
Right.
but the visual will be the Beastie Boys.
Right, exactly.
And that's, we're talking about across the season.
Yeah, exactly.
You say, oh, wow, okay,
Exactly.
this is the hip hop.
Yes, exactly. So this is what you have, and even the Moroccans. You know, you have visuals of the Moroccans. They all look white. They all look pale. You know, so and so this is the impression you get that Black Africans contributed nothing when it comes to Africa and the Islamic world in general. We were the richest. The West Africans were the richest in the Islamic world. You have to think back, the Arabs did not have oil until like in recent centuries. They were not
Until
rich.
Standard Oil.
Right. We had, you know, over again, the kingdom of Takru, I want to talk about. This kingdom is little spoken of in even African studies. You know, you find a lot of people that pride themselves in being Afrocentrists know hardly nothing about the kingdom of Takru. Takru. Yeah, which again was a Fulani kingdom. They were called the Takruri back then.
Centered where?
In southern Mauritania, Senegal. And the Fulani, the Jola people, the Serer people. And their biggest exports was, you know, gold was like nothing. You know, their biggest exports were like textiles. Because they were cattle breeders, the Arabian horses. You know, they bred the Arabian horses. And these were like prized items in the Islamic world. And then you have the ivory trade, you know, of the tusk of the elephants. You know, elephants up in the deserts, you know, and of Arabia or North Africa. So all this comes out of Black Africa. So when you look at Islamic art, there's gold, there's ivory. This comes out of Black Africa, and this came from the kingdoms of Black Africa. And again, textiles, which made the West Africans rich. They were so rich that when they went over to Egypt, they called them the Takrur people. They would raise the price. You know, and they hated the Egyptians because they had to go through Egypt in order to go to Mecca and make Hajj.
So that was the tariff.
Yeah, no, it's like the West Africans, let's raise the price of everything.
Period,
because these people they have money.
Oh, okay.
You know, they're rich, and we were known to be rich people. So how is this totally absent? Mansa Musa, not even mentioned inside the exhibit at all. Timbuktu, again, Fouta Djallon, which is which had a democratic government before America even formed. The millions of books and the literary achievement of Black Africans, totally missing from the Islamic exhibit. And again, the portrayal is white, pale people. Even when you go to the Indian exhibit, where she highlights the Indians look white, you know, and absent from that are what was Sylvian Jouf brought out. She has a book called Servants of Allah. And she did an exhibit. It was a fleeting exhibit. Like, this Islamic exhibit is a standing exhibit. It's been there for years. It'll probably be there for a few more years. It's a standing exhibit. And but her short-lived exhibit at the Schomburg highlighted the Habashi, or Ethiopian rulers, in India. And so you have that totally missing also from the Indian portion of the exhibit. And these were Muslim rulers with the name Shah. You know, you have Malik Ambar, the Jaunpur rulers. And this is also missing from the Islamic Indian portion of the exhibit. But she has a whole room for Hinduism.
The value of knowing black history is the value of knowing history.
Yes.
When you go into black history, you're finding the missing pages that you will have gotten in high school and college. Black history is all in that, but it's not laid out.
Exactly. Exactly.
What brought you into a consciousness, a interest in this area, the Fulani, et cetera?
Well, again, that was once I was already a researcher of history before I even knew my roots. And so when I found my roots, oh man, I went straight in. You know, I dived into trying to research and find everything I can about, you know, my people, the people that I come from, their achievements, their accomplishments, which span from the west coast of Africa all the way to the east. And in doing so, you find, you know, the history of Africa in general, and you know, black Africans in general, and our achievements. So again, that's where my interest in current interest is spurred from. But my love for reading goes back. I mean, I was researching since high school. I used to hang out at the Schomburg after school, you know. So this has been my
what
thing
led
for a
you
long
into
time.
that? You know, how far can you trace back your
as
interest
long
in
as
reading?
the library has been one of my favorite places. As long
Did
as
your
I can
mom
remember.
introduce you to the librrie? Your dad, your big brother?
It was instinctive. You know, when I went to took my first trip to the library in the Bronx, I would go there after school and just hang out there. You know, and it's always been my dream to have, you know, a library at home, which I have now. You know, praise be to Allah. But yes, that's always been a love of mine. And again, so researching just came natural to me.
In terms of this interview, what is a therefore that the audience should be left with? Okay, the exhibits they're not complete.
Exactly.
They look complete. So what does a person do behind this program?
Well, the person has to study. You know, what's interesting, Brother Leroy, I studied books like Science and Civilization of Islam. You know.
What's the title?
Science and Civilization of Islam, which is the great contributions that Islam has made to Western civilization. Western civilization owes a debt to the Islamic world. The first university ever comes out of the Islamic world. The word chairman, from the Arabic word kursi, you know, when in the Islamic world, when somebody teaches, everybody sits down and the teacher sits in the chair. That's where the term chairman comes from.
Go ahead.
And the university was indeed the study of the universe. And a woman from Egypt, she's the one who built the first university. You see, so here Africa again is at the root of even Islamic learning, because the first university comes out of Africa. So in studying these sciences, you know, you definitely want to see yourself in the picture. And recently I was in Chicago, and my favorite place in Chicago is the Adler Planetarium. And the Adler Planetarium. And you know, when I first went there, they had the African Sky Watches, and which is a movie And you know, at the planetarium, they showed a movie up on the ceiling.
Yeah.
And they were showing how these Africans knew the stars and they traveled long distances.
The Dogon.
The Dogon knows the stars, but also the nomads, the Tuareg, the Fulani,
all
the
of
Berbers,
them, because that's how they travel.
That's how they travel. You know, the Quran says, "By the stars you are guided."
And the people who took ships came over to this part of the world. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So that's a different story.
Ivan Van Sertima is...
Yes, they came before Columbus. And so when I seen that, I was like, wow. And downstairs they have what's called the Islamic astrolabe, which is, they have the largest collection of astrolabes in America.
What?
Astrolabes are considered the world's first computer. And it's a disc, which was first made in Egypt. And it's a disc it's a star disc. And it has, like, some of them have 3 plates. You turn the dial, and you calculate your directions by the star disc.
Man,
the largest exhibit is at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. So
it's worth going to Chicago just to, if you're serious.
Yes.
And everybody's serious. I'm serious. Listen, we have 2 minutes, and. You mentioned the library in not the library, the planetarium in Chicago.
Let me just finish that point real quick. So when I was studying Fulani history, Hanno, which is one of Barth, it was Barth, a European explorer. When he went to Nigeria, he met this old Fulani man, and his father had an astrolabe. You see? So this device was used by the Black African during the heyday of the Islamic period. So I just wanted to throw that in because it originally comes out of Africa, and during the Islamic period it was used by Africans as well.
A couple of books you would recommend. You've mentioned books. Share with the audience a couple of books.
Well, I definitely would recommend Sylvia Anjup's books, Servant of Allah, for terms of Islam, Science and Civilization of Islam. There are other books that are not readily available that I get through French sources, and I can't think of the title, but it's about the colonialism in West Africa, and these books are important because it shows you how they have directly impacted our psyche, and when you go through these exhibits, you see the reinforcement of what they have put in us already through colonialism and slavery.
Well, I have to thank the library for you, my brother, and thank God for blessing you with the knowledge, the wisdom, and getting understanding that you would share with this audience. And we'll see you again very soon. We might do a part 2 on this bad boy and grow in knowledge and go to the library and go to the museum.
Yes.
Thank you very much for watching Books That Matter, People Who Matter with our guest, Brother Elijah Shabazz Ba. And once again, the program is dedicated to promoting reading among all segments of the viewing audience. And thank you for joining us today on Books That Matter, People Who Matter. Thank you again. Thank you again. This is an important, a critical area of study for our young people.
Yes.
Because the images that they are getting normally is not, or tends to be abnormal.
Right.
And abnormal from our standpoint. And what have you seen occur with some of your students who you've taken to the museum, growth and development, or?
Oh, wow. I mean, one of my students, he's a great public speaker now. He opens up at the mosque every Sunday. And, and he started that with our research trips, which is we would go to the Schomburg Research Center, and I would have them research particular topics out of the Muhammad Speaks. And, at the end of the year, we have our moving up ceremony they would have to present. Also from the museum and the different topics that we take up at the museum and presenting those topics. So you see that intelligence coming up out of them. And Sister Lois of the Learning Tree, she was very impressed by the way the students presented with the PowerPoint presentations and what they learned. So you see these young teachers coming up, and these young researchers coming up, basically reproducing myself in these young brothers. And so that's the type of impact they have. They are becoming teachers and leaders themselves.
Well, what we're going to do is get back into the flow of interviewing you for one more segment.
Okay.
And that's if you'll give us your time.
Sure.
Okay. And welcome to Books That Matter, People Who Matter, the program dedicated to promoting reading among all segments of the viewing audience. Our program is dedicated to promoting reading and getting people to begin to pick up a book, put down the cell phone, okay? Take a book on the train tomorrow morning. And hey, but that's up to you. It helps, and it can rub off on some other people who are just playing video games. I'm Leroy Baylor, your host, and our guest today is Brother Elijah Shabazz Bah, and we're talking about the museums of the city of New York and racism that is very subtle, but is present in many of the exhibits as it relates to black folks. Once again, Elijah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We talked in the first segment about an exhibits at the Museum of Natural History, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and we haven't really gotten into your students, the students that you have been able to take along with you on these trips to the museum. Tell us about that experience and introducing them to the museum. And are they bored? Or are they, another trip?
Oh, no. I mean, my students, actually, it's exciting. I actually give them a sense of independence. What I do is I have them, bring along a notepad. And I go around with them at first, and let's say if we're studying the animals. And again, from a Muslim perspective, the Holy Quran says that the animals are communities like yourself. So we take those subjects up, and then we go and we study these different animals, their behavior, their families, and their culture. They're just like us. So what I'll do, I'll give them all, I'll give them their parameters, and they have to, of how to take notes. And it's really simple: who, what, when, where, why, how, details, and I let them pick, the particular animals that they want to pick. And they, I know, they use their smartphones for cameras to take pictures, and then they come back, and then when we come to our class, they present. You see? So they research and then they present. And so that there is positive habits that they develop into becoming teachers themselves as they go on, and how to organize their knowledge. So that's the type of impact I've seen, working with young people and bringing them to the museum as a teaching tool. And we do that with the animals, we do that with Islamic exhibits, we do that with other exhibits too, no matter what subject we're studying, astronomy, or what have you.
Talk about some of the students who you have been able to educate through the years. And my observation is, I call them the little boys that, well, now big men, the big men who used to be the little boys, because I saw them very, very young.
Yes.
And some of them have families now.
Yes, they do.
Talk about that aspect of your work, and obviously the satisfaction that you've gotten from it over the years.
Well, that's what basically kept me teaching for 20 years. Volunteering, and this is something I do on the weekend. And the impact, just teaching on the weekend, just giving my time on the weekend has been phenomenal. Again, as you stated, their husbands, their fathers, and their professional people. Some went into engineering and other fields of endeavor, and so when you see that type of fruit coming from your labor, it will keep you going. So, when I listen to my students, teach, when they either teach on the rostrum during the Sunday lecture and so forth and so on, I see how their basic training of organizing their knowledge now goes into the way they present the spiritual word, and and how they enlighten people. So yes, that's the type of impact that teaching and preparing our young people has had in the 20 years that I've been
in our first interview in terms of this segment, the racism in New York City's museums, that the explaining that you have done for our audience, I'm looking at that as being a session in critical analysis for your students.
Yes.
They see something, but based on history, they have to look beyond or into something.
Yes. So again, they have to go and learn the background of this particular time period. So, they'll say that, in the museum, this piece is from the 15th century, the 16th century, the 13th century. Well, what was going on during the 13th century? Was Africans still running around naked in the 13th century? 13th century was Takrur and Mali, ancient Ghana. So when that these type of civilizations were present on the African continent, particularly Western Sudan, that this is a total misrepresentation of our people during that particular time period. But you have to have knowledge of that time period.
Let's talk about Timbuktu. Henry Louis Gates has, in the last few years, been in that part of the world.
Yes.
And he has been involved with the folks in that area, digging up books that were buried under the homes. How familiar are you with that?
Well, when the colonists came, their greatest wealth was their books. And so this is what they had to hide, from the colonized, because they was literally burning the books, and, just basically putting us in a state of ignorance so that they could then put their information into the head of the next generation.
The French and the English and the Germans, et cetera, when they came in, the folks knew to hide their books.
They knew to hide their books in wells.
And the story in Timbuktu is that they buried many of those books under the homes.
Yes, they buried them under the homes. They buried them in wells where they once drew water. In Mauritania, they buried them in the sands, and they know where they are. Like to this day,
They don't have to use a laser from a drone.
No. They could go and they could dig it up because they know exactly where they are inside the desert, the vast desert in Mauritania and North Africa.
That had to be a very strategic enterprise on their part.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, they basically knew how to hide this knowledge from them. And again, even when I went to Fouta Djallon, I'd seen that they still had these type of books inside the families of the people of Fouta Djallon. So
that is what country?
Guinea, Fouta Djallon in Guinea.
In Guinea.
In Guinea, yes. They had the University of Sankore in Guinea, and so you had this, this great learning center on the west coast of Africa, Timbuktu, and as well as Guinea, and Fouta Djallon, and the influence went from the west coast of Africa all the way to the east coast of Africa. For instance, when the Mahdi of the Sudan, when he started his revolution,
against the English.
Yes, the English, the British. He had soldiers from the Fulani and the Hausa in northern Nigeria. One of the Fulani holy men, Uthman bin Fodio, he had a vision that the Mahdi would come up out of the Sudan. And so when this man said he was the Mahdi, they went and they helped him to fight against the British, and they were successful. When they established their government, they called for the scholars of Futa Jallin, who already had an Islamic government. And it was the scholars of Futa Jallin that helped to set up the government on the east coast of Africa, in the Sudan.
What was important about that? All right, they called on scholars for them to do what?
Well, the fact that they called on scholars all the way from the west coast of Africa, Sudan is like all the way in the east, and the scholars, because the Futa, again, they already had a democratic, constitutional democracy in the Western Sudan, in Futa Jallin. They wanted that knowledge and that organization when they set up their government on the east coast of Africa. So you have the scholars, and this comes from Timbuktu, because the scholars in Guinea, they were first educated. It was the scholars of Timbuktu that set up the government in Futa Jallin. Mm-hmm. You see? So you had these scholars influenced from Timbuktu now going all the way to the east coast of Africa and helping to set up a government there.
That's interesting that system of government, and that's why you protect your scholars.
Yes.
And at least in those countries, here you have think tanks that are tied to a particular philosophy, and the 1%, and there's 99% poor,
right.
And these think tanks guide the governments to keep that system in place.
Correct.
Here you have, if I'm correct, here you have the scholars being called on because it's known that their books embody the successful organization of empires even.
Yes.
So they bring them in.
Yes.
And it shows that the image of Africans being just savages is very incorrect.
It's totally incorrect, and this is why we have to eradicate that type of image of our people, particularly in public places like the museum. Which is not only do I take my students there, again, that the class trips, they go, and this is what the students see of African people. White people need to know. Chinese people need to know. People of all races need to know the black contribution to civilization is of utmost importance. So yes, you have these scholars, and we descend from these scholars. You see, so when you ask me like what inspires me to do this, I say it's
You're
genetic.
driven.
Yes, genetic memory. It's like it's driven. Our people come from, wise and rich people. Some people say when black people want money, they're imitating white people. No, we were once the wealthiest people on the planet. So so some of our people are driven to just be wealthy. They have to have that money. They have to have the best, because yes, our people had the best. And some of us, we were, they say you have two type of Fulani. You have the book Fulani and you have the cow Fulani. The one that walks around with the cow, and you have the one that's that's into the books. Well, I guess I come from both people. The book and the cow Fulani, because the love of books has always been there.
In our first session, you spoke about this empire that's very seldom spoken about, that was very rich.
Yes.
And they were noted for raising horses. One of their...
Yes, that's the Takrour Empire.
Takwa Empire.
The Takrour.
Takrour.
Yes, Takrour. Some confuse it with the Tukalor Empire, which was also in Senegal, which was also a Fulani Empire. But this was the Takrour Empire. And again, textiles, were one of their main products. And textiles, again, is clothing. It could be pillowcases, it could be couches, it could be tents, it could be rugs and carpets, in the different designs and the colors. This was one of their main products that they shipped to Morocco, not shipped, but, sold all across the Islamic world. And, again, the prize horses and the cows and the livestock. It was rich in livestock because the Takwa people were cattle herding people.
When you talked about the horses, the raising of these fine horses, it reminded me of the Nubian cavalry. Where have you done research on the Nubians and the horsemen? And they were not supposed to be, because I've seen photos of them. Today's world, they are noted horsemen, warriors on horseback.
Yes.
Have you done any study in that area?
Not directly. I can't say I have.
And what about those individuals who crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and went into Spain?
Okay.
And set up that 800 year
right.
civilization.
So the first ones were the Umayyads. The Umayyads, were the Arabs that came out of us. And East Africans that came from the East and came over to set up the Islamic Empire. And they swept across North Africa. The ones that went into Spain, they were the Berbers who came over to Islam. And one of them, their leader was Tariq. He was a Moor.
That's the Straits of Gibraltar.
Right.
Tariq.
So he had 10,000 of his people that went into southern Spain and opened up southern Spain for the Umayyads. So it wasn't the Arabs that conquered southern Spain. It was the African that conquered southern Spain. And once they conquered southern Spain, then the Arabs came in and they, set up their government and stuff. And what happened is that they pushed the Moors out. And so there was this fight between
going back and forth, which you read about
for centuries. And this is what made it necessary for Yahya and Ibn Tashfin, who started the Al-Murabitun. He came down to the Takwa people in southern Mauritania and Senegal and asked them to help him to conquer what is now Marrakesh, which is the country of Morocco. And so our king, Wal Jabi was his name, and his son Labi of the Takwa kingdom, they put together a force along with the Jadala Berbers, which are the Tuaregs today. And they formed a force that went up into that area. And for the first time since the Umayyads came, they removed the Arab hegemony over that area and set up a kingdom by native Africans, and that was the Al-Murabitun. And that was the beginning of Morocco. That is the beginning of the country Morocco, which the real name is Marrakesh. But again, the Islamic, the Arab hegemony in Spain, they was becoming weak. They got rich, they got wealthy,
Right.
they got weak, and the French were coming in, encroaching on their power, and they were losing power in Spain, in Europe, and then, the Al-Murabitun went up and saved the Islamic Empire in southern Spain. So their empire ran from southern Spain all the way down to Mauritania and Senegal.
And share with the audience the importance of knowing that 700 or 800 year rule
Yes.
by Africans over Spain,
Yes.
what did that mean to Europe?
Well, to Europe, it brought enlightenment to Europe, because all this knowledge out of the Islamic world, first, they had only one university in all of Europe, under the Umayyads and the Almoravids. You had like 32 universities. So
That they set up within that area.
within Europe, yes.
Now, how did that benefit Europe?
It brought enlightenment. They were in the Dark Ages.
In other words, they would come in. They were free to come in.
Yes, they would come in. They brought hygiene to Europe. You know, they said that when they would cross that water, you could smell the stench
Wow.
of the people as you went across the Straits of Gibraltar and as you approached the
They said
shore.
we're getting close.
Yes, you could smell the people because they didn't believe in bathing.
Oh, man.
So they set up the bathhouses. You know, they basically
The public baths.
Yes, the bathhouses. Yes, to clean the people up. So you know, the first hospital comes out of the Islamic world in Persia. You know, so they brought, you know, they didn't know nothing about medicine and the leaf and all of that stuff. They didn't know anything about that. That all comes out of the Islamic world. So you know, health and hygiene and you know, higher learning, universities, it's all come out of the Islamic world. So that was the benefit. And, you know, Muslim, Christian, Jews all benefited. Again, when the Umayyads came, a lot of the Jews particularly, they welcomed the Muslim because they were being persecuted by the Christians at that time. And it was the Muslims that armed the Jews in order to, you know, defend themselves. So, yeah, it was of great benefit to Europe. It was great benefit to the different religious communities. And they actually called on the Muslims. They called on the Al-Murabitun to come and save their empire from the encroachment.
I'm going back to Africa, Timbuktu and Mali and the Dogon. In terms of Timbuktu, you have a learning center. What does that mean? Well,
Mansa Musa, who Ibn Khaldun says come from a long line of Takrur kings, when he went up to Timbuktu, he was impressed by the scholars there. And he built the first university of Timbuktu. And it was the Fulani, the Tuareg, the Berber, and the Arabs. You know, they were the ones who were the main components of that. And there was another learning center in Marrakesh, but the scholars of Timbuktu would run circles around them, you know, and even when those who learned in the Arab world, they would come, and the Timbuktu scholars, they were more well-learned than all of them. So what that means is that, you know, we have a rich heritage of learning among our people.
How do you explain Timbuktu being a learning center for sciences, period, but also for Islam?
There is no
Mecca is over here, Timbuktu is over here.
There is no Timbuktu without Islam. That's why, you know, when anyone who tries to that's an Afrocentrist that tries to knock Islam, but then hold up Timbuktu, you absolutely can't. You know, you can't hold up ancient Takrur and knock Islam, because Islam is at the root of all these governments.
What is Islam?
Islam, the learning comes from the Quran. You see?
Read, Iqra.
Iqra, read. The sciences are inspired by ayats of the Quran. So again, when you were in Timbuktu, the first thing you had to learn by heart was the Quran. You couldn't be a scholar and you didn't know you weren't a Hafiz of the Quran.
Because that's your base.
That's your base. That's your base.
Give an example of something in the Quran that would enhance a scholar.
Okay, so you know, Allah says in the Quran in Surah At-Tariq, it talks about the knocking star. You know, this throbbing type of star. So this is a particular type of star that is in the heavens. The Quran also said, by the stars men are guided. The Quran also says that wherever you are, turn your face towards the Kaaba. So all of these type of ayats inspired Islamic astronomy and mathematics. Mathematics, for instance, you have, again, I told you about the Islamic astrolabe in the last segment. And trigonometry was inspired by that ayat of the Quran, turning your face towards the heavens. Because you had to use angles in order to figure out where you were. One of the attributes of Allah is he's the hisab, the accountant. He measures, qadir, which is a measurer. So Allah says, tells us to reflect on His creation and study His creation. So you have this, they were measuring the earth in the Islamic sciences. The circumference of the planet Earth, and they did that by going up on mountains and multiplying the curve of the arch on the horizon. So these are the things that are inspired by ayats of the Quran. Managing their affairs. Algebra comes out of Curatorial Anisa, where it talks about if you have one son and two daughters, you give this son this portion, they get a fourth and two-thirds. Right. And this is where you get algorithm. Algorithm. I should say not algebra, but algorithm. They credit it to Al-Khwarizmi, but Al-Khwarizmi said, no, I got it from Curatorial Anisa. You see? He just took the system and, put it into practice.
It's knowledge that was there already.
Right.
And he just put that bad boy together.
Right. So without algorithm, you can't have a phone, you can't have a computer, you can't have none of this stuff because all computers run off an algorithm. So this very system of mathematics comes out of the Quran, comes out of Surah Al-Nisa. So all of this, the Indians had, when you go to trigonometry, the Indians had sine. They only had one angle, sine. So it was the Muslims that brought sine, cosine, tangent, cotangent, secant, cosecant, because of the different angles you had to measure in order to find your way back to Mecca. So all of this stuff is inspired by the Quran, all of this learning, all these different sciences. So you start with the Quran, and then you write your books based on the various subjects. Okay. Zoology, you expand, animals.
Build, as the 5%ers say, you build.
Yes. Like the first book of animals comes out of the Islamic world by Al-Jahiz. So this is the first book of zoology, the study of animals.
Not to know this, not to study it, is to cheat the young of America, regardless of what so-called race they might be. It really cheats because you're giving a fraction. The system is set up to give you a fraction of what the knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
And for us, for black folks to give this piece fortifies the self-image of black youth. Correct. And therefore the black future generation.
That is true. And I must add that Greek knowledge was also transmitted through the Islamic world. It wasn't like a continuation, passed from generation to generation.
Say that again, Greek knowledge.
The knowledge of the Greek knowledge of, the different Greek scholars and so forth. All of that was transmitted to Europe through the Islamic world.
It came from the Islamic world.
Yes, they're the ones that brought it back to light because they had lost the knowledge during the Dark Ages.
They had a number of Dark Ages.
Yes.
All right. Brother Elijah Shabazz Ba, thank you very much. Once again, thank you. And we thank the Most High for blessing us with the opportunity to serve you with a program to stimulate your reading, your research, most of all. Read to a child. Get them a book for a change. Thank you very much for watching Books That Matter, People Who Matter. Thank you, Elijah.
Thank you, Brother Leroy. I think we got a lot out of this one.
Thank you very, 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 very much.
Praise be to Allah. Praise be to Allah. It's a great honor.
Okay.
I think we went off air.